inspiring Uganda.
Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. Tonight we look at substance and not form. 3.5 trillion shillings of a supplementary budget. 1.56 under the 3% that comes within the Public Finance Management Act. What does happen with the 1.94 trillion shillings? What is the breakdown there? We also look at different facets of this money. When we trickle down to separate the chaff from the grain, where is this money allocated to? Why did government borrow money before it even got to Parliament to be able to ask for permission to do so? There are very many questions about this money and what it's going to be used for. When you look at the details, you see a recurring budget and less of a development budget. Does that mean that our debt swells as a country? What does that mean for debt to GDP? What does that mean for you as an ordinary Ugandan? If government is going to borrow domestically, especially from commercial banks and probably money lenders, what does that mean for us? Let's meet the panel that is going to be putting analysis to this discussion tonight. From government on the extreme left there, he is Dr. Chris Badiomunsi, Minister in charge of ICT and National Guidance. He will be putting perspective on what this money is meant for, especially when we look at the different facets that are involved in it. Next to him, he is a veteran politician, a veteran citizen, a senior citizen at that, Captain Francis Babu. He brings analysis from edges on to see exactly where is our country going, especially when we look at how frequent supplementary budgets have been. Next to him is Dr. Sarah Birete, the Executive Director of Center for Constitutional Governance there, and also a lawyer. She'll be bringing perspective on how wisdom of both the law, but also what policy should look like when we're borrowing money and where we should be putting our money to work. Finally, tonight, we'll also have Professor Sarah Sali, who is a dean at the School of Gender and Women Affairs. She'll be bringing perspective of what an ordinary Ugandan is thinking about this when we discuss all these things of supplementary or midterm access or all these things of the physical policy. What does that mean for us? When we break it down to an ordinary Ugandan, how does it affect you and I? Also, we'll be getting our Honorable Omara Paul, all the way from Rwanda. He'll be speaking to us about what the budget committee was thinking, especially looking at portions of this supplementary were meant to be in the national committee, the National Economic Committee there to discuss it. So you can be part of the show. Go to our YouTube channel, let us know what you're thinking, but also you can be part of the show. Text us or drop your WhatsApp on 0709 62 25 90. You let us know what you think. Or go to our X platform, UBC, hashtag UBC, Behind the Headlines, and you let us know what you're thinking about what we're discussing. Honorable Minister, I'll start with you, and especially on the biggest question that everyone is asking. What was the reason behind, or the reasoning behind, this supplementary budget of 3.5 trillion shillings, and was it justifiable?
So thank you very much, Timothy, and thank you very much, viewers. Good evening. I don't know why you chose this topic that we come and discuss supplementary, because a supplementary budget is not something out of the ordinary. A supplementary budget generally means that we already passed the budget and appropriated resources as Parliament, but as you implement, there is a revision. Government revises some of the allocations, and the law provides for it. The Public Finance Management Act 2015 gives authority to government to prepare supplementary budget if there is need. I just want to first settle that one. Secondly, a supplementary budget is raised in maybe 2 or 3 circumstances. One, if you have surplus corrections, if you correct over and above what you had targeted, you have to supply that extra resources you have collected. Or if you get emergencies which are not budgeted for, like say, like we have had heavy rains and they have destroyed roads, like in my place of Chigezi, which is quite mountainous. Roads have been washed away, bridges washed away, and we never expected this. So UNRWA and Ministry of Works require additional resources to fix some of these emergencies. Then the third area where a supplementary comes in is if, as you execute the budget, you realize there were unforeseen circumstances which cannot wait and have to be funded. These are some of the areas which attract supplementary budget as you execute a budget which had already been approved. So it is normal world over in all countries. There is usually this provision for supplementary budgeting, because you cannot just mechanically and rigidly implement a budget. Usually there is room for flexibility in case of those situations in order for you to address the challenges as they come along as you execute a budget. So I just want the viewers to first understand that context. Now, coming to this, and almost every year, we have always handled supplementary budgets, so it should not be portrayed as if it is something very strange or something unimaginable has happened or something unexpected. No. That's why I'm saying I don't even know why you chose that we discuss a supplementary budget. Now, fast forward, this supplementary which we have just passed as Parliament, first it originates from the Cabinet, and the Minister of Finance coordinates all these supplementary pressures, and then the Cabinet considers all these proposals, and once it is passed, then we take it to Parliament for consideration and approval. Now, the law, the Public Finance and Management Act, also provides that the executive under the leadership of Minister of Finance can actually spend up to 3% of the budget which you have passed as Parliament without requiring the executive going to Parliament for approval. So meaning that as you start executing a budget, the executive can spend up to 3% over and above what has been passed, but then within 4 months, the executive has to bring a report to Parliament. It has to report to Parliament within 4 months. Now, the 3.5 trillion supplementary budget which we are talking about, part of it was spent within the 3% limit which is provided for under the law. I think the tune of around 1.5 trillion. Then the rest is now over and above the 3% which has to get approval from Parliament. And we are basically funding unforeseen priorities which had not been provided for in the budget which we passed, touching different sectors, because different sectors in the government are addressed in this supplementary. But let me also say that of the 3.5 trillion, 2 trillion was basically to do monetary policy balancing. It was money being paid to Bank of Uganda. I think through the Ministry of Finance that borrowed from Bank of Uganda, so money was being returned to Bank of Uganda at the tune of 2 trillion shillings. So what remains is 1.5 trillion shillings for the different services and activities. And a range of ministries and departments are beneficiaries of this supplementary funding, including UBC here, which we are giving up to 22 billion shillings, UBC, to support operations of UBC as a national broadcaster. we have money we are putting to the road fund. Like I have said, we have had heavy rains which have destroyed our roads. So part of the money is to do road maintenance and repairs. We have a national census, housing and population census, which is coming in May next year, next calendar year, but in this financial year. And I think some of the key areas that have to be supported had not been provided for in the budgeting. So there was that realization that the money has to be provided. They are like Ministry of Energy. They are contractors who have not completed some of the work they have been doing, and they have to be paid, and many other emerging priorities within the energy sector, and many other, Ministry of Lands and others. So basically the resources which were provided under supplementary funding is to facilitate service delivery. It's not money to just consume. I have seen on social media that the members of parliament have been given 100 million shillings to pass this supplementary. How I wish I had received it. I am a member of parliament, I have not seen it. So, but I think Uganda is probably because we are entering Christmas time, it is time to relax. People just post things to engage our brains and engage in discussions, but the money which we have passed through supplementary budget is to facilitate service delivery for the benefit of Ugandans. And
I'm glad, Honorable Minister, yes, you have spoken about that, because the criteria in the Public Finance Management Act is unforeseen, unavoidable, unobservable. The question is, of all these things we see, Munyonyo, NIRA, Emanelenda, NAM, and even UBC that you're talking about, yes, were these unavoidable? Are they unforeseen? Where do they fall in that criteria?
Yes, when we are budgeting, of course the national resource envelope is limited. So we squeeze and try to provide for different areas as we consider the budget. Because usually we have a ceiling and we have to fit everything into this. But as you implement, you realize there are areas which cannot wait. For instance, we are constructing a convention center to host the NAM and G77 meetings, which are going to take place in January next year. Now, in the course of execution of this budget, you realize there is a funding gap which still exists. Now, do you say we shall budget for it in the next financial year when the conference...
Minister, we knew about NAM in 2017.
Yes.
Before COVID. We also knew about NAM before we got into this budget. So the question is, 5 months into this financial year, why are we asking for a supplementary budget?
Yes, probably the other question you could ask, where are you getting a supplementary? Because also supplementary may mean environment of resources, reallocating resources from one line to the other. So supplementary, by that it means we are getting money from heaven and throwing it on the ground. It can also just partly mean rearrangement of the budget which you passed. So when we are supplying the budget in Parliament, it occurs sometimes that you do not provide, you fail to provide the full amounts of what is required. Because we propose as the executive, and then the Parliament supplies. And sometimes the Parliament supplies something different from what we have proposed. And then we realize that in the course of execution, this gap still remains. That's why in the law, Parliament in its wisdom provided that you executive, we shall supply and give you these figures, but you are at liberty to spend up to 3% over and above. Because what we propose to Parliament, sometimes Parliament cuts these figures, and probably we fail to convince them, but along the way you realize maybe it was an error, or they never appreciated why we had proposed a certain figure, but then the law still gives room that should you feel that there are areas which are so critical, which cannot wait, then the executive can spend over and above what Parliament had passed. So basically that is how the supplementary comes in. And we want to say that all the areas which we are funding are not wasteful. They are not wasteful areas of expenditure, but are areas which will facilitate the growth of our national economy.
Thank you very much. I hope we have Honorable Mara online so that we can be able to engage him, since he sits on the budget committee there, to put perspective to this supplementary budget. Honorable, are you with us? I know you're in Rwanda, and I hope you're enjoying your stay there, but can we dig into this conversation, since you were part of the people that passed this supplementary, if you're with us? The biggest question is, what did you pass and why did you pass it?
Thank you very much, Timothy. I'm speaking very clearly from Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda. As you know, there is parliamentary games going on, and we are winning literally every game. But coming to your question, I would want to start by saying that the Public Finance Management Act, as amended 2015, Section 25, provides for a supplementary expenditure. At the same time, the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, Section 156, if you read subsection 1, 2, and 3, also provides for the same. So we should establish from the onset that a supplementary expenditure or appropriation bill is covered under the law, under the Public Finance Management Act, and also the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. That said, and specifically to Public Finance Management Act, which allows for the government of Uganda to spend within 3% of the budget which is approved by Parliament. So as you recall, this financial year, the Parliament of Uganda appropriated or approved 52.7 trillion shillings. And if you take 3% of that, is about 1.58 trillion. So what was presented to Parliament by the Ministry of Finance, the one which was already spent was 1.57 trillion. Then what could require a prior parliamentary approval was 1.92 trillion, 1.97 trillion. If you add those two, the total supplementary request within the appropriation bill was 3.5 trillion. Now, Timothy and viewers, the question I think people have been asking for is whether the items within the appropriation bill met the fundamental criteria of being unforeseeable, also of being unavoidable. We took our time to look at the items within the appropriation bill, and indeed, most of them you would see that they are actually unavoidable, although some of them were foreseeable. For example, like the census money. We have been talking about that. And Uganda, you remember that the national budget, the East African countries have agreed to read the national budget on the same day. And for us to have correct macroeconomic indices, which is covered during the population census, it becomes mandatory that we must conduct a national census. And that was not covered for under the current financial year. So that one was actually unavoidable. Just giving you one example. The second one, of course, is NAM. NAM is going to have almost about 120, would of course opportunistically take advantage of an opening in the budget process and then try to stack in a few items. But overall, our judgment call was that If what is within the appropriation bill is executed very well by the executive, and I'm happy that the Honorable Minister of ICT is there, it is now their clarion call to make sure that what Parliament has appropriated is executed for the people of the Republic of Uganda.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mara. Let me get back to the studio. I'll be getting back to you in a short while there with a few more questions.
Find out if he's going dancing tonight.
Captain Francis Babu, he said they're winning all the games there. We'll find out about the games later. But let's find this where taxpayers' money is going to be spent. He says 3%, which is about 1.56. He also talks about the budget of 52.7 trillion shillings. We also know that in the budgeting process, it came from 50 to 49 to 52.7 trillion shillings. Do we still need budgeting in this country if supplementaries are now our daily course of meal?
Thank you very much. I think there's a total misconception. First of all, define what a budget is. A budget is an estimate for 1 year. You sit and each ministry brings what they require that year. And then the Minister of Finance, which is in this case I call the daddy of the house, puts there something called a ceiling. You can't go beyond that because that's the money they have in the kitty. Now, each ministry can bring these things and the Minister of Finance can say, look, Minister of Education would like to give you more money, but this is what we can allow you to have. So the ministry can ask for 100% and they get about 70%. Some ministries get 80, 90 of what they have asked. So that's another point you've got to get. These are estimates. It's not cast in stone that you must follow it that way. No, there are all sorts of things happening. For example, when COVID happened, you didn't count for it. So there are certain things that happen during that 1 year that require to review the budget. And there are things that we underestimated. The ministry, the particular minister or ministry with his ministry did not bring out very well. And then we realized they're so important. Now, for example, he has given you what is unavoidable. Whether you like it or you don't like it, you must do something about it. For example, if you have an earthquake, just for an argument's sake, now that comes in a year, that money is not budgeted for. Suddenly you need to find out whether you can get money to try and cover up that. Now, this Bank of Uganda, the one they're talking about, after COVID, there was a lot of things that were required immediately, and they had to borrow money from the Bank of Uganda to be able to cover those things. So that is unavoidable too. But the Bank of Uganda needs that money to function. So there are many things one has to look at. Now, after they have made a budget, and suddenly there are certain things that come up during that time, it's allowed, within the law they say, let's have 3%. We don't require even to go to Parliament. That 3% automatically can allow the Minister of Finance to sort of help whichever area needs to be helped. But if the area is bigger and you require more than 3%, you're supposed to go to Parliament and lay down a point. And the minister actually here came and he broke down everything that they wanted. There are things you have not even looked at here, where certain kingdoms required to be given money which have been promised for many, many years. They've never got it. And it reached a point when they have to give them that money. So at the end of the day, what I have realized, and this is the Ugandan propaganda scheme that goes on. First of all, we don't understand what budget is. We don't understand what a supplementary is. And I'd like to thank Mr. Omara for having been very, very clear. He's given you the law. The law is very clear. And the supplementary is within the law. And the way they did it and the way the minister did it, he went to Parliament and he gave them this point. And it's very clear. Now, you cannot say this will not happen because, first of all, an estimate could be wrong or could be good. So,
Captain, let me jump in, sorry, a bit there. URA has shown in the last few months it has grown its revenue by 16%. We have been growing our budget for the last 6 years. If you look at 2022, 2023, we grew it by about 5 trillion shillings to where we are now. So that was an estimate. But the estimate comes from non-taxable revenues, looking at what we're getting in. You live within your means. Why are we failing? Because August we were here, we discussed development versus debt, and we're talking about a 5.2 trillion shillings supplementary budget. So we're back at it now. The biggest question that I am asking you, why do we budget if we know that in 5 months we're going to come back and put a supplementary there? And some of the things you're saying are unforeseen. NAM was unforeseen, Munyonyo was unforeseen, NIRA was unforeseen, Lubowa supervision was unforeseen, classified was unforeseen. We even borrowed money to go to Congo. So I'm still wondering, any ordinary Ugandan, for basic information, why do we budget if we're going to still have government come in with supplementary budgets?
No, those things were not unforeseen. They were actually foreseen, but they underestimated what they required. And I think this is extremely important. You say NAM was known, yes, but NAM now required a little bit more because they have now realized they underestimated what was required for NAM. And because they underestimated, they have to go back and look for that money. Now, this happens all the time because you are estimating. In estimating, you sometimes underestimate. And this is extremely important. I think what is important here, and this is where I think we have a little bit of a problem. I see there is a minority report, even from the committee. And the minority report, it talked about something completely different, which also required help. And actually, the speaker said, look, can you try and help this group to get some more? It was to do with the seedling. I think it was coffee seedlings. And they agreed to put this money out. It was a good suggestion. So all I am trying to say is this. Don't underestimate, for example, the war in Congo. To estimate its extent and its width is not that easy. We're talking about fighting a guerrilla warfare with an army going to flush these people out. You can't estimate and say, oh, we are going to get these people out, but we require so much money, and that's enough. No. You go there and you find you get other problems. And therefore, you must go back and get some more money. Whether you borrow it or not, you require. Now, you say that our budget has been, we've been underestimating because we've been expanding every year. Even your population has been expanding. Your country has also expanded in other areas in your economy has also enlarged. Now, when this happens, you're bound also to be able to move with it. And sometimes when you do, you miss out certain things, which now fall into the budget, which you did not estimate. Now, we talked about the NAM. Let us talk about NAM. You could have said, oh, we have NAM. Oh, no, but I think we have a few things here and there. We have a few hotels here and there. And then you realize you don't even have a convention center, which can take on this big group. But that's not the first time we've had that problem. Nile Hotel was built around that time, about the same problem we were facing at the time, when they were going to have the African Union here. So what is happening is that you're going to have a convention center which is going to be able to facilitate the NAM group when they come here. Now, that one I cannot argue about. There are other things which you have talked about, which you think, oh, we should have seen that. Who should have seen that? And when they saw it, what did they estimate? What was the estimate on that one? And what was the shortfall? It is the shortfall that they are calling supplementary here. And by the way, I've been in a ministry where a budget is made 100%, and then the same parliament cuts it. And then they find out what they have cut is actually important. Now, this parliament has cut certain parts of this budget, which now ended up in the 3%, which were cut by parliament.
I can see the parliament cut the budget of police by 54 billion, and now police is failing to feed policemen. So now police has to be supported in order to feed the police officers.
Okay.
So you see what I'm trying to say? I think budgeting is not as easy as if it's a snap of a finger. An estimate can play here or there depending on how you look at it.
Thank you very much. Let me bring in Dr. Sarah. Doctor, I know you have looked at these budgets and I know you have discussed them over the years. I also know that in last year's budget there's something they call money that was revoted, money that was brought back and put back into this budget. We also look at the Public Finance Management Act. I think my twofold question for you is the law the problem here, especially looking at Article 156 that Honorable Mara quoted? Is the Public Finance Management Act the problem in Section 25, that it has loopholes to be taken advantage of?
No, I think the law has no problem. The problem we have is a government that does not follow through with its plans. And you know, abuse of our budgetary system is not a standalone act. We can talk about national planning, you know, NDP 3. In the midterm review, we had only attained 17% of NDP 3 performance. So that shows that we plan and take another route away from our plan as a country. Budgeting is a 12-month exercise. Immediately after enactment of a new budget, the new budget cycle begins with the user departments initiating a budget process for the next financial year. We spend 12 months, adopt a budget that starts running in July, and in November, we realize all these things and think they are unforeseeable, they are unavoidable, and they cannot wait for the next budget. Let me pick an example of NAM, which looks like something justifiable in this supplementary budget. In April this year, Parliament approved a 4.6 billion supplementary for Munyonyo, for the convention center. By then they were calling it a bar, a marina, and now it's the same project that we are approving 37 billion between April and November, and in between a new budget. Does this look like something unforeseeable? It was unforeseeable in April, and we couldn't take care of it in the budget, and it is again unforeseeable in November. This is simply a fiscal indiscipline of the government. It's unseriousness. How do you pass a supplementary budget for a project twice in 2 financial years? How? If you look at the budget for State House, in the budget for the annual budget, State House had an allocation of 421.921 billion. From July to November, the budget for the 12 months is done. And in the supplementary budget, you have more money for State House than the money for a whole year. We have 485 billion. Does this look like a serious budgeting? Not at all. If you combine the 421.9 billion for State House and the supplementary for 485 billion, and I can bet on this show that State House will ask for more supplementary budgets too before the new budget. So State House now has a total of 906.921 billion. If you appropriate that on average by the annual calendar year, 365 days, State House spends 2.5 billion per day. I think it's important for the viewers to know that the cost of a seed school in Uganda is estimated at 500 million. And the State House consumes 5 seed schools per day. A cost of a kilometer of a road is estimated at 2.8 billion. State House consumes almost a kilometer of a road per day, tarmac road per day. Is it an industry? Is it a factory?
But I hope you recognize that State House these days includes the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation.
Honorable Minister,
Yes.
you will share the details. I know that State House has functions. They
Because
do.
you're asking whether it's an industry.
Yes.
The answer is yes. 'Cause
Okay, fine. you will come in with the details. So when you have, so what happened when State House budgeted for 421 billion for an annual financial year, and now they need more money in the supplementary than the annual budget, because supplementary, but you know, by common understanding, should be something additional. You are supplementing. It, you know, you cannot then overrun the annual budget and think you're supplementing. We simply don't have fiscal discipline. Budget is a joke, it is a scam. If you can double and exceed an amount for a total year, it is a scam. If you look at things like Lubowa, supervision of Lubowa Hospital, does Lubowa Hospital exist? The last time I checked as a citizen, MPs were stopped from accessing the foundation of Lubowa. It's just a hall that is surrounded by iron sheets. And citizens are not allowed to access that place. MPs were blocked. The ministry officials told the parliament that they've never accessed Lubowa Hospital. And that is the time the health committee blocked additional money for Lubowa Hospital. In the last financial year, the same amount, 2.7 billion, was in the budget for supervising Lubowa Hospital. In a supplementary, you have the same amount supervised Lubowa Hospital. Last month, a journalist with one of the major media houses in this country was arrested for attempting to access Lubowa Hospital and cover a story to update citizens. What else do you need to demonstrate that this is a scam?
And sticking with you, Doctor, when you look at especially the elements of this supplementary budget, what does it speak to our budgeting process? Are we responsible? What is causing the indiscipline within our fiscal policy there?
Well, I think that's a question best answered
Okay.
by the minister. As really an activist, I'm looking at people who, you know, who don't care for this country. I'm looking at people, because if you can make a budget, I know that there were unfunded priorities in the budget. If a supplementary was coming to say, these were our priorities as a country, but they were unfunded, and now we have some money, we think we can fund them, but they are already captured as priorities, I think that would make more sense to a citizen. But when you come up with items that show that a budget process is a waste of time, there are things that should be funded, like NIRA and renewal of citizens' identity card, the national census. The question is, why didn't we put money? Because our budget does not depend on the envelope. We know that URI is estimated to correct 27 trillion. Out of that 27 trillion, 18 trillion goes into debt servicing. So we remain with about 8 trillion or 9. But we budget for 52 trillion, 53 trillion. So you cannot say that we did not budget for NIRA because we don't have money. We did not budget for census because we don't have money. Because we do not have money after all. We correct 27 trillion, but our budget is never near that figure. It is 53. So why don't you budget for these items that are statutory, like the national census?
Okay. Allow me bring in Professor. Professor, what do these supplementary budgets speak about our planning processes as a country?
Thank you very much, Timothy, and good evening, viewers. I don't think actually they speak much, but what it really does is to communicate that the country is responsive vis-a-vis its limitations. I think one thing...
What do you mean by responsive?
I think one thing we need to understand is that the country has needs. But the country also has a limited resource envelope because of the nature of our economy. So it has needs, but then it is also poor, okay? And the needs are communicated by the people in a way that certain things can't wait. I think, I don't know about the others, they have talked about State House and the rest, but when you look at some of these issues which went into the supplementary, around 55 billion is going for the education loan scheme, the higher education loan scheme for the students, okay? Who have not been, actually that bit had been cut out from the budget. The other bit, around 19.8 billion, is going for the medical interns and SHOs to cover their pay as you earn, their payee, so that at the end of the day, after taxation, they can go home with 1 million shillings, okay? Of course, then there are also the tree seedlings. I think what happens is that the country has certain aspirations and priorities. The people have certain needs and demands. Yet, when we are doing the budget cycles, we've already started one in November now, you're given ceilings, as everyone has said, and the cuts are made. So the needs are always articulated in a way that is more than what the resource envelope can bring. So by the government, by me saying the government is being responsive, is trying to add, it looks like it goes through the period where we have to respect the cuts. But as Dr. Sarah has just said, that we don't plan with cash. So even a budget as a budget is an aspiration of what we want to do, and is an aspiration of what we intend to achieve should we get the money. And sometimes, as someone has said, if we don't realize that money, indeed people actually suffer cuts, further cuts. But in case we realize that money, then we go into a supplementary. But a supplementary, like now, we are having one, of course, it's non-tax revenue, but also domestic borrowing. So what is the challenge we have as a country like Uganda? You have a fast-growing population, which is internationally exposed, which is on digital media, and wants to see certain things. But you have a limited resource envelope. So while you go through the first cycle, then you come back and you do a supplementary. And I think that's why the PFMA provides for some where you don't need to go back to Parliament, and then when you need to go back. Because at the end of the day, you have interns on the ground. What do you do with them? You have the student loan scheme has been reducing. I think in 2022, they were only able to support 625 students. Yet in 2014, they were able to support more than 1,000 students. So it has been going down, and this year it had been totally cut, okay? So on the ground, people are not alive to these debates of, like we're asking, is this financial prudence, or is it just being irresponsible? People on the ground are looking at service delivery, okay? So is there this for me? Are the students being able to study? Like now, if you count how many students are missing exams in higher education institutions because of lack of fees, they are quite a number. Then, of course, the other thing the public will remember is that interns were demonstrating because they didn't have money to post them, and maybe even when they were posted, they are having arrears. So that's where then a supplementary comes in, and if you look at the role the interns do in hospitals, they're like the frontline health workers. So it's important that we actually are financially prudent, like Parliament and the ministers will do, but it's also important that the people on the ground get the service that they can relate to and identify. I mean, you'll tell a person on the ground that we are heavily indebted, and they say, what does that mean? Because they're looking after themselves. I think the challenge we have as a poor country is that the banks we go to borrow this money charge a very high interest rate because they are foreign banks. And I think this should inspire us as a country maybe to develop more local banks. Because we have been here before to debate that actually, why for us we borrow, I think, at a very, very high rate, like 13% and above, people with their own local banks borrow at 3%. So that makes their debt, and also if they were to run into things like supplementary, the prices wouldn't, the amounts wouldn't be so high. So we have these challenges, but as you said, budgeting is important. It is important for stabilization of the economy, for controlling inflation, for actually managing the economy in a particular way. But you also have a challenge of a growing population with excessive demands, and it is internationally connected, and it is highly informed. So as a government, you have to see how you balance between financial prudence and responding to certain needs. So that's the catch-22 situation we are in. And actually, the planners have to navigate a very tightrope.
And Professor, before we even take a break, you say responsive, but I also ask responsive or reactive, and where should the priorities be? Yes, I'm not going to wake up from Busia and say we want a road, and then government reacts to put a road. What should be the priorities or the drivers for either budgeting or a supplementary?
I think budgeting, as we've discussed here before, is one about growing the economy. So you need to grow the economy so as to even place the people you're training, okay? So that is one. You grow the economy, but also you meet the needs of today. You're not going to tell people to suspend the needs of today because of what you're trying to stabilize in the future. Maybe if we had such long lives, this would make sense. But we're in a country where situations sometimes end up being very precarious. So while people want you to budget by the way, first of all, there's no reactiveness in the budget. A lot of data is collected that goes into the budgetary process. Because all these MDAs actually have to generate what their needs are. They have to justify why those are needs. They have to indicate what will suffer if they are not given the money. So a lot of information is collected. So there's nothing like reactiveness. And that's why even when they do the supplementary, they go for those particular areas. But as the speaker was saying, maybe we should expand more and make sure even the nurseries are in because of their role they would do in the country, especially if you're talking about coffee nurseries and coffee seedlings like that. So I think it's not being reactive. It is having this, I don't want even to call it a wish list, because it's a very justified list of what every MDA wants to see in that area. And as they do their justification, it is based on information which is coming either from the national planning processes or information that the ministries collect all the time, or from the researchers, or through parliament and their constituencies. So an information gathering process takes place. It is not random, okay? But because of the limitations of the resource envelope, then prioritization occurs. So when prioritization occurs, the message is not that the other sector doesn't matter. It matters, but for now, we are going with this. Like when you look at the student loan scheme, actually, the prioritization is to STEM, okay? But maybe if they had enough money, they would also carry the non-STEM subjects. So prioritization occurs. But in case they realize more money, that's when they bring on board that which was not prioritized before. So I wouldn't say it's reactive. I think it's trying to be responsive to needs. Because within the supplementary, there's also another prioritization according to where the biggest impact will be. And that's why, like in this case, even when we are talking about 19 billion to health, the priority is to interns, because maybe that's where the need is. But of course, there are other needs in health that would be important. In education, they have provided certain things. What was missing is the education sector. I mean, the student loan scheme. But if they are given more money, I imagine they would recruit more, because many of us, especially like higher education institutions, we are operating at 50%. So if we had more money, we would operate at 100% and do all the research we want to do. So I think let us stop thinking it's reactive, but trying to be responsive with a limited resource envelope. And that's why I think the budget lines which were prioritized before for growing the economy, for production, needs to be monitored, and we ensure that actually it leads to what it is intended to do. Because as long as we remain a poor country, these kinds of things will continue happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. For us here, let's not take supplementary time. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be discussing the details of where this money is going to come from. And the minister will give us perspective. Are we crowding the economy already? This and more after this break.
Metu Bus Industries, Namamve, the manufacturers of buses for transporters, schools, tour operators, and special purpose vans and any customized vehicle. Metu Bus Industries offers buses known for safety, comfort, and reliability. Depending on your needs, a bus can be people mover with just seats, or a special design that includes power outlet, Wi-Fi, television, refreshment center, and any other specification. buy your buses from Metu and support industrialization of Uganda. Contact us on 0788 118586 or 0782 030303. Email us metuafricabus@gmail.com. Visit our website www.metubusafrica.com.
Meet Brian Namanya, a visionary and a game changer whose team at Tubayo is breathing new life into domestic tourism by curating exciting yet affordable experiences for Ugandans and foreigners to enjoy. With the help of technology, Brian is showing the immense potential out there. Those who know Brian know a serious entrepreneur who's always been challenging the status quo and won't stop now. Brian, we're in your corner. You are unstoppable. MTN, the Unstoppable Network, celebrates you. Visit www.tubayo.com and together, let's support Ugandans like Brian, who are driving our country's unstoppable progress.
Juku. Yo. Check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Haven't you heard of the Parish Development Model PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, Sebatia. It is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juku. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. What you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that. The Parish Development Model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines, and thank you very much for joining us. In this last leg of our show, we'll be getting into the details or the intricacies of what the supplementary budget entails, especially looking at 1 or 2, 3 incidents that are there budgeted for. I'm joined by the Honorable Minister, Dr. Chris Baryomunsi. I'm also joined by Captain Francis Babu. I'm joined by Dr. Sarah Virete, and finally, Professor Sarah Sali. Online, I also have Honorable Paul Omara, who I'll be getting to in a short while, but your messages have come through and we'll be dealing with them in a short while there. Honorable Minister, let me come to you. And now let's get into the details. Where is this money being gotten from?
Yes, thank you very much. But before I specifically respond to that, I think an impression should not be created that raising a supplementary budget is necessarily a sign of indiscipline or financial mismanagement. No. I have said the law provides for it, and many other countries I have been to put that provision, because budgeting should not be a rigid and mechanical process that you have passed the budget, therefore you sit and relax. If there are heavy rains and roads are destroyed, you don't have money, yet you wait for another financial year. So I think I don't create that impression. It's like you leave your home, you are going to town to buy a suit. And maybe you had estimated that the suit will cost you 1 million. Then you reach there, you say, no, hey, now a suit is 1.5 million. And then you require to call your wife, said, I think send me additional 500,000 because the suit, the price has since changed. You pay for it, the suit that you like, then when you try to fit it in, then you see you require to go to the tailor to maybe work on it and adjust it. Those are realities of life. So even the budgeting process, like Honorable Babu says, is not cast in stone. There is that room for flexibility. Let me give you some examples of where money is going, for instance. We are providing money to the Uganda Road Fund. Like I said earlier on, in the last many months there have been heavy rains which have damaged the roads. Definitely any reasonable Ugandan listening to us would not want the government to wait for July next financial year to look for money to fix these roads. You have to go into that flexibility to raise additional money to make sure that we fix these roads, because we never foresaw that there would be heavy rains which would cause
Honorable
a
Minister,
lot of damage.
if I could jump in on that one.
Yes.
The President recently decided that in this financial year would allocate 1 billion to a district for the roads.
Yes.
Uganda Road Fund was meant to be doing the same role. Isn't this a collusion course between the road fund and the districts that are supposed to be receiving money on this directive?
So my question would be, when the President announced the 1 billion, did he factor in the heavy rains which would come? The answer is no. No.
But there's another point. I think you should get this very clear. In the district, there are roads which are made by the center,
yes,
and there are roads made by the district itself. So the district gets money to do their own part of the roads. I think we should get that point clear.
And there are roads which are done by UNRA and the Ministry of Works, the inter-district connecting roads. Like now, come to Kanungu, you cannot cross from Kanungu to Kabale because the road is cut off. That's a UNRA road. I have been engaging the office in the Kabale UNRA office, saying we don't have resources to work on that road. So definitely the government can't sit and say, oh, we shall wait, we have already passed the budget, we have to wait for next financial year. It has to mobilize resources within what the law provides in order to fix that problem. So it has to be understood from that context. We are giving money to Makerere University, and part of the money is to cater for educational materials such as cadavers for medical students. If you realize that the challenge in the training of the medical students, the cadavers which you use to train students are inadequate. You are not going to wait for another financial year to fix that issue. You may not have picked it in the budgeting process, but along the way, you're now seeing the deployment of interns, like she has already said. I have seen like prisons, we are giving money to prisons because they're saying they have realized the price for maize and beans has exponentially shot up. And now they have a huge shortfall. They cannot feed the prisoners as well as the prison officers. So that's why there is that room for flexibility within the budget, that you realize such an issue. You cannot sit and say, oh, let the financial year first end. You will get a crisis. So it should not be portrayed as if raising a supplementary budget is a sin. It is not. A supplementary budget is raised in order to fix the challenges which come along the way as you implement. And this issue of State House, sometimes it is presented as if State House is a home of the president. Therefore, when we give supplementary, I have seen some MPs argue, they think it is the breakfast, lunch, and supper for the president and the family. No.
And the wife.
And the wife. No. The State House is a government institution. The other day, one MP was saying, oh, how can we provide all this money for clothing to dress the president? Not forgetting that we have state lodges all over the country which require curtains, bedding materials. We have these presidential model farms where we have workers who have to be dressed with the boots, gum boots, and the uniform and so forth. But somebody just reduces it to clothing of a president and they create a wrong impression. I have just said during, when I interrupted my sister, Honorable Sarah, that in the last changes in the government, the president now took the Ministry for Science, Technology and Innovation and put it under State House. And we know a lot of research, a lot of innovations, the manufacturing of these buses, the Kayora buses, now all fall under State House. So you may see the budget as if it is bloated, but it is funding most of these areas. We are talking of now having electric cars, electric motorcycles, all those fall under the State House budget. So we have to unpack some of these areas for the public to understand. So the question you're asking, where are we getting the money for this supplementary? And also to remind viewers that, like I said, during COVID, there was a lot of borrowing by government from the central bank. And a big portion of this money which we are funding through supplementary budget, the tune of 2 trillion shillings, is just paying that domestic debt of Bank of Uganda, which is still government money, but just reorganizing the government coffers. So Ministry of Finance is just paying back a debt to Bank of Uganda at the tune of 2 trillion shillings. Then you remain with 1.5 trillion shillings to cater for these other services which I am talking about. One source of funding will be the additional URA revenue corrections. The other source is the environment reallocation within the existing budget lines. Because like I said, in my ministry, for instance, ICT, you budget for different items. Then you may realize maybe there is an emergency happening in this area, but we also have resources in this line. Then you can readjust and reduce money from a particular budget line and put it on another line depending on how the priorities are within the ministry. Then the third source is borrowing, which is going to be domestic borrowing. So we have 3 sources of funding. The additional revenues realized by URA, then realigning the existing budgetary allocations, what we call environment, and then 3, a little bit of borrowing in order to meet these supplementary needs. But I really want to emphasize that a supplementary budget does not necessarily mean that you are indisciplined, that you are not spending the money very well, but is usually raised to answer to the issues which arise as you run the budget implementation.
And I think before I get to Honorable Mara, one of the things Dr. Sarah, I think, was specifically asking, 421 billion, not just State House as the President's home,
yes,
but has it run out that we need a supplementary 485 billion? I think if I get what,
yes,
has the 421 billion that was budgeted for 2023-2024 run out that we now need 485 billion?
Supplementary doesn't mean that you have necessarily exhausted whatever you have been given, but you could have exhausted particular lines of expenditure. For instance, we are giving UBC 24, close to 25 billion shillings. It doesn't mean that there is no coin within UBC, but particular operations are suffering. Like there may be money for salaries to take you up to the end of the year. But there are other areas of operations which are stuck because you don't have resources. So you can raise a supplementary to fund those areas, even when, for instance, UBC has money for salaries for the workers.
Okay.
Doctor, you had something? I have a question, Honorable yes. Minister. There was money, 12.098 billion, for public service to give to Money Lenders Association. What is this about?
Is it
yeah, for the money lenders under public service. Is the public service a money lending entity? And is it funded by taxpayers' money? What is that?
Okay, I have not crammed the whole budget in its detail, but I can cross-check.
What exactly microfinance for the artists?
No, the microfinance for the
that
artists.
Is under agenda 13 billion. I'm asking public service for the Money Lenders Association. What was it about?
Honorable Ministers, you...
Just give me time, I check.
Let me give you time to check. Let me get to Honorable Omar Paul, who is in Rwanda, before I get to Captain Francis Babu. Honorable, you sit on the budget committee, and the 3% that government is supposed to be getting without parliamentary approval, like the minister said, some of it is going to be borrowed. Were you consulted before this money was got and used by government, and how did you treat this?
As I said before, the law is very, very clear. Well, there's the section which I quoted, which is on the Public Finance Management Act, Section 25, actually allows government to spend up to within 3% of the approved budget. So, but after doing that, they should come within 4 months and report to Parliament. So it is not illegal for them to spend. It is already provided for in the law. The only thing that would happen if Parliament so decides and says, no, what you have spent, we disagree with it, then it becomes what they call the nugatory expenditure. Now that the entire 1.57 trillion was approved, it means that Parliament actually agreed that what the executive used the money for is reasonable or is acceptable. Now, the source of the money, I think the minister has clearly explained the source of money. But I just want to make one correction there, which where he said the 2 trillion was part of the appropriation bill. No, we rejected, the Honorable Minister, we rejected the 3.3 trillion, which was which was in addition to the 3.5 trillion. So which means that the supplementary appropriation bill would have been much higher. But what we told the minister was that he should go and come back to us and we look at it properly so that we understand what is happening in BOU. As you have explained correctly, and let me explain for the viewers. The government of Uganda normally borrows money through the treasury bills and bonds, and then also externally by borrowing through those concessionary loans. But normally the one for the domestic debt, a moment those debt matures, Bank of Uganda would liquidate those debts on behalf of the government. And so therefore, whether we have enough revenue collected or not, Bank of Uganda will settle those domestic debts, whether it's treasury bills or bonds. And here's the reason. If they don't do it, it would completely obliterate our money markets as we know it. And it will have a lot of ramifications in terms of international credit ratings. And so therefore, Bank of Uganda will not allow the government of Uganda to default on its domestic debt. And so you will have to find actually institutional investors, because of maybe attractive rates, treasury bills or bond rates in Uganda, they will come here, buy shillings and buy those bonds or treasury bills. But you can't tell them when those bills matures and say, no, we can't pay. So Bank of Uganda will settle it on our behalf. And therefore, that tends to create a hole in Bank of Uganda. And the minister has reported that by, I think, June last year, that hole was about 4.8 trillion. And we have paid some. And so the minister had come in to say, you know, there's this 3.3 which I need, and 2 trillion will go to really settle debt at Bank of Uganda. But we said no, that was not part of the motion on which was presented to the House on appropriation bill. So the minister will come later on with that. So the 1.57 trillion was already spent, and then the 1.9 was that required parliamentary approval. So as the minister said correctly, yes, there have environments. Some of them, there were capital, there were recurrent expenditures, which was allocated as capital expenditure. So that one will be basically internal movements. And then, of course, there will be the government will go into bond and money markets to borrow more money, and then the money from Uganda Revenue Authority. And let me say this, that when during the budget process, what they call the unfunded priorities were actually over 10 trillion shillings. So the president kept on increasing the budget ceiling, I think from 48.9 trillion, going up to 52.7. In fact, the last one, the Minister of Finance and the Secretary to the Treasury was with the president in Baralegi in my constituency, when actually they came back with the agenda, the last agenda to increase the budget ceiling to 52.7. So the responsibility of putting a budget ceiling is the sole prerogative of the president. Parliament cannot increase the budget. We don't have that power. What we basically do is to do the supply. But the president would normally look at the pressures coming out from the different circles in the country, and then would keep on adjusting that based on the revenue sources that he sees. And so I would not be surprised to find actually that a supplementary appropriation bill would come to the tune of 3.5 trillion, because for us in the budget committee and in parliament knows very well that the unfunded priorities for the people of Uganda is big. And therefore, we cannot continue to borrow to meet those budget demands. So we'll do it incrementally. And I could understand that when the pressures come within, even before the financial year has ended, then the government would come with an appropriation bill to accommodate some of the shortfalls or some of the urgent matters that they really want to contain within the financial year. So Timothy, that explains, yes.
Honorable Mara, before you leave us, how much of the 1.5 trillion was borrowed? And did you as the budget committee approve that borrowing?
No, this is how it works. It's part of what we call the treasury operations. Is the treasury cyclical requirements. As you know, the government of Uganda operates a cash-based budget. So when something urgent comes and you are a treasury manager, whatever is collected is spent based on the urgent priorities which is required. So what was spent was part of the revenue collections, which was done, and the harmonization of the borrowing is going to happen now when actually this appropriation bill has come into the House. So it's just like you borrow from Paul, and so that when you get from Peter, then the next time you come and fill up what you had picked from Paul. So what government will do is that when they finally have gotten approval, because they could have picked money which should have gone into certain sectors or within the budget, the one which is approved budget. So when they borrow now, they will use that money to fund some of the budget lines. So there was no criminality in terms of that they spent money which was not approved. I think they just used what was collected within the treasury. It's a treasury management issue. It is not about spending money which was not approved. Nothing like that, Timothy.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mara. I hope you bring back the trophies and the medals. We hope to see them when you return. Let me tell you.
Tomorrow I'll be on the golf field. There is a competition tomorrow, so we are going against Kenyans, South Sudan, Tanzanians, Sudanese, Rwandans, and then also Burundians. It's a great show on the golf course, and I intend to come with a trophy.
We wish you all the best. Captain Francis Babu, something the minister said is the borrowing, and domestically. Small, medium enterprises are also hoping to borrow from the same commercial banks here. When you look at this borrowing, one, it's expensive when we look at the interest rates. Isn't this crowding, especially while government has opportunities elsewhere for them to be able to borrow domestically?
Let me tell you one thing. The Minister of Finance, some of our experts, they weigh all these questions you're asking. And I sometimes wish the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance was here. Before government borrows any money, they weigh the situation. And the source of income, by the way, I'd like to thank the professor who told you this country is poor. And therefore, if we were to go for that definition of the economy, which is managing scarce resources, this is when it comes in. How do we manage scarce resources? Where does government get its money from? First of all, most of our money comes from URA and some of the things that we sell a few things like coffee, and in the olden days it was copper and so on and so forth. But whatever we sell, all of it comes back and goes to the consolidated fund. Now, if the money is not enough, the one we have, the one we've collected, I think she told it was 27 trillion, and we want 52.7
trillion.
So that difference there, we must find out how we can finance it. Either we finance it by borrowing, or we finance it by getting grants, and so on and so forth. So all that money, once we've done the budget, then we look for a way, before they do the budget, they look for a way and means how they can fill that gap. That is why they keep telling you, we've never had a complete, we've never had enough money of the 52.7. We've always been around 50% of our budget. And the rest of it is actually brought about by loans and grants and so on and so forth. Now, you talk about borrowing money. I'm tired of Ugandan. World Bank is a money lender. Standard Bank is a money lender.
But the interests are different.
Wait. These are all money lenders. Let's get one point very clear. The only difference you're bringing out is that the interest rate is different. But they're all money lenders. So at the end of the day, if what you require cannot be got from a particular group, you go to a group that can give you this money because you have an urgent need which you must take care of. Now, I get extremely...
And banks like World Bank, you can't just go there and come with the
No.
money.
I get disturbed.
Procedure.
I get disturbed. This World Bank, which was started by Rothschild many years ago, it started by a Jew, a Zionist Jew, and he's the one who gave them the capital to start the World Bank, and we're borrowing from that bank. One of the things that has really hurt me up until now is that people think that World Bank is somewhere in heaven. It is not. It's a money lending organization and is used to control certain things. Now let's go back to where, if World Bank cannot give me this money, who will give it to me? Because I've got a need. I've got to go to a group that will give me this money.
But how expensive is your
need? And I
need?
negotiate with them. No, I negotiate. The interest rate that you know, that me and you can get, is not what the government gets. They will negotiate for a better rate. So, I've been hearing people saying, of course it is not good. By the way, it's not good to borrow money at all, if we had a way. Yeah. If we were rich enough to be like certain countries that they gave people free water, free electricity, free this, we would do it. But we are not that rich. Therefore, we have to borrow. Borrowing is not good. Let me put it that way. It doesn't matter whether you're borrowing it from Rothschild's World Bank, or whether you're borrowing it from Standard Bank, or whether you're borrowing it from any group. The borrowing is not good. The question is, and you put it very clearly, the interest rate. So our experts who are in the Ministry of Finance and government, they sit down and they weigh the situation. What do we do? We have a situation which is, requires money now. Do we borrow this money or we don't? So I can assure you, before they borrow that money, they sit down and think very hard. And sometimes they've got to take the loan because they require it for a particular thing which must be mitigated at that particular time. So I've got a problem. When our people are talking, they talk about corruption and then they talk about these technical things which are done. But technically everything is done. Is it correct or not correct? And I'm very happy that Omara, who is an expert and who sits on a committee, tells you what the government did in this particular case was right. The question now would be, is there any corruption in this whole thing? And this is where I think we mix the issues. There is the budgeting and its problems, and then there is corruption, which we should talk about. I have no problem with corruption at all. Let's talk about it. Where is it? Where is that corruption people talk about? But it's not in the budgeting. It is after budgeting that people might be able to do this kind of thing. So when I sit down and listen to people talk, you can see that we need technical people. And by the way, Omara, I think, was very clear. He's a technical man. He spoke very well. And we would have been better served if we could have got the Secretary for Treasury also to give his side of the coin. Now, there are people in Parliament who have given a minority report, we should look at that minority report more seriously. But I like the way they put it because it came out very clearly what they want to talk about. So there is a new, I think it's a new trend in politics in this country, that we must complain about everything and we do not bring out the actual facts. Now, in fact, the other day somebody was talking about State House. I said, but why don't we change the name from State House and call it a ministry of something? Because then we would be looking at it as a ministry. But now we are looking at it because the president and his wife stay in the State House. I think they should remove the name State House and call it a ministry of something.
Captain, let's come back to these, the borrowing, especially domestically. When you look at the World Bank or the IMF, it's about 0.07. It's about a concession of 10 years and then 40 years of you repaying. We're going to get into the same market with someone in Chikubu, borrowing from the same bank. When you look at all the banks we have here, hardly do we have indigenous banks. Isn't this going to be an expensive loan? Looking at the biggest percentage of this supplementary is recurrent.
That question is a very good question. And the right people to answer it is the Secretary for Treasury, and tell us how they came to that decision. Because I sit here and I can only tell you that because I have put trust in a man like the Secretary of Treasury, he should be able to tell us why are they borrowing from that kind of group. And he will tell you the World Bank, the other day said they will not lend us money. But we need money right now. And the only person who can give us is that...
Yeah, but part of the answer is that this domestic borrowing, you want money urgently to fix some challenges. The procedures for World Bank are quite different. It can take you 3, 4, 5 years to start the process and get money from World Bank. And also, institutions like World Bank will not lend you money for anything like your recurrent budgets. So you must know that if police is having a shortfall in feeding the police officers or prisons, you will not run to World Bank to say, give us money to buy Porsche for police. That is money you can easily mobilize from the domestic market. So you have to look at it. But if you are borrowing for tarmacking roads, extending electricity, water, those are things which you go to World Bank, to China Exim Bank, and so forth.
But the interest rate they give the government will not be the same as the man of Kikubo.
Government negotiates and gets better rates than if you and I went Stanbic Bank or Standard Chartered Bank here locally.
But I would like you to, if we talk about what is not going right because there are faults which are made, then we talk about the corruption. But we better have facts.
Okay, let me bring in Dr. Sarah. Dr. Sarah, when we look at some of these, let me pick on some that are here. And I remember one of the times we were having a supplementary budget, there was a discussion of borrowing money from a Kenyan money lender. When I heard you say it, I looked at it here. Munyonyo, what is the return on investment? When we look at NAM, what's the return on investment? Does government do an analysis in this area to look at such agencies of money and their return on investment?
You know, the debate on Munyonyo is the most confusing. During accountability for CHOGAM in 2007 and post 2007, Parliament thought they had approved a 49% purchase or shareholding in Munyonyo during CHOGAM. When the committee went to Munyonyo, the Public Accounts Committee, the owners of Munyonyo said they did not know about that. And that question went unanswered. Later, 10 years later, in 2017, information came that the government owns 25% shares in Munyonyo Commonwealth Resort. The URSB search is blank. At the beginning of the debate for money for the non-aligned movement summit, the same debate recurred in Parliament. So if our representatives as Parliament are not aware about investment, public-private investment of taxpayers' money, or are not furnished with information, how are we as citizens represented and informed? Because as citizens, we only get accountability through Parliament. If government invests taxpayers' money, the return on that money should be clear. So if we purchased shares in Munyonyo during Chogam, 2007, these are now 14 years. How much interest have we made? Has it ever been paid to the Treasury as interest to Ugandans? And if not, then on what account do we continue to invest money in Munyonyo? How does a taxpayer get value for this money? I would be interested in answers to that question. But I would like to talk about public debt. As of December 2022, our public debt stood at 80.8 trillion shillings. And it was projected to rise to 88.9 trillion shillings by June 2023. I don't have the current information, but the division of the 80.8 trillion shillings, you have 47.9 trillion as external debt and 30 trillion as domestic debt. Whereas it is easy for government to get money from local lenders, what does it mean for private sector as an engine of growth for our economy? If a private investor is competing for a loan in Stanbic Bank, for example, with the government, banks would rush to lend the government because it is less problematic for them. It is the most comfortable lender. But what does that mean in terms of available money to grow the economy, in terms of private sector? Uganda is a liberal economy. So when you take away money and compete with the private sector for resources, are we looking at any growth in the economy, or we are looking at milking money internally to deprive private sector as we shrink the revenue base, basically expanding the public debt? Because we shall continue to borrow both domestically and externally, while shrinking the economy and revenues. Is that stability? We also have a question of domestic areas. Contractors that are still demanding from government, and this takes away money from the economy. And once you do not have the cash flow or money saturating in the economy, then even the 27 projected money might not be realized. Last year, URA realized a shortfall in revenue collection. I think they collected 22 point something trillion. Today, the 27 trillion we are talking about is a mere projection. So if you shrink the economy by milking money and competing with the private sector, will you realize the 27? And if you don't, then won't you accumulate much more debt? Also, we have an increase in non-concessional borrowing. Yes, we can talk about World Bank as just a mere money lender. But we know the money we are, in terms of loans and grants, we are getting from World Bank. And I hope the conversations, because the president has been saying they are still in conversation with the World Bank, I hope there will be a conclusion to those conversations. Because if you look at the 75% of our debt, external debt, used to be concessional loans. So when we drop from that and rush to Exim China, and how do we safeguard the economy from what is happening in Kenya, what happened in Zambia, and all the other countries that have been rushing to China to get money? And then we have a rise in non-concessional borrowing from just last year, 21.9 trillion, now, no, 21.9%, we are now at 25% non-concessional borrowing. And the two loans that were passed by Parliament on the same day as a supplementary were from China. So how safe are we as an economy?
And staying with you, Dr. Sarah, as listening to some of the people in the business sector, some companies are moving business to either Kenya or Tanzania because of how expensive this is. How can government make this enabling, even as it's competing in the same market for the same loans?
Well, I did talk about fiscal discipline or indiscipline in my beginning submissions. I think it's important to note that when you have an economy where you have uncontrolled spending, you are unable to reduce public debt, and you don't have long-term planning and efficient taxation. These are characteristics of fiscal indiscipline. Do we have these four featuring in our economy? Of course, yes. When you have a situation of supplementary budgets, I'm not saying supplementary budgets are illegal or unheard of. The law provides that they should be unforeseeable and unavoidable. So once we make them the norm, that you have things which are obvious, featuring recurrently in the supplementary budget, then it shows that you do not have the characteristic of long-term planning, and it is part of fiscal indiscipline. When you don't have, you can't control spending. So most of the things featuring on a supplementary budget is because we do not control spending in this country. It's not that they are necessary, they are an emergency, no. You control spending through budget discipline. And this is what I'm not seeing as a citizen.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Professor, let's flip this coin a little bit. Are there any learnings, any lessons we can gain from all these supplementary budgets, including this one, to learn from moving forward, both as citizens, but also as government?
Thank you, Timothy. I think one of the things we need to do is to stop looking at whether supplementary budget, overrunning the budget in isolation. I think we need to look at these countries as countries that are navigating a tight ship within an unequal global economy. 40 years ago, we took a turn, yes, 40 years ago, we took a turn to divest government, to get government out of development. So government actually went out of development. The economy got very liberalized. We thought at that time that that was the right way to do things. That's how agencies like World Bank and IMF actually take charge of these countries. But over the years, you've seen literature, not even coming from Uganda, from many parts of the developing world, that actually that economic model does not work. That these countries are going to be saddled with debt. Whether we are going to be here and preach financial prudence, the global economic order is designed in such a way that you're not going to get out of it, except if you do something different. I know there are issues of financial prudence. Dr. Sarah has said we should focus on that. When Captain Francis Babu has said we should talk about what's not working. But the truth of the matter is that the way the global economy is designed is not actually to enable these countries come out of poverty. It is designed to keep these countries donor-dependent, designed to be debt-ridden, and then for us, the elites, we shall sit here and discuss what is not working. It's true what is not working, but we also need to locate what is not working within the broader schema of things. And actually, these countries are struggling. With the populations they have, they went out of development and sold their industries, and then you saw what COVID did. We had believed that the private sector is a great solution to things until we had a crisis like COVID, and all of us were now, government, what are you doing? And maybe that's why we have the 2 trillion issue from Bank of Uganda. But what have we learned? Out of this, we should have learned that there's a central role for the government to play in economic development. That the previous wisdom of government get out of development, focus on security and things like that is not sufficient. Government has to take, but if everyone narrates about the glory days of the 60s, who was in charge of development? The government, okay? So government went out of very many things, thinking the private sector would go in. Private sector goes where there's quick gains. It doesn't go into long-term planning. Okay?
Point.
So if you're talking about roads, you're talking about pay for interns, if you're talking about cadavers, if you're talking about giving students in higher education a loan scheme, because you're not even sure they're going to get jobs, and or when they will ever get those jobs, and whether the jobs will be gainful. That kind of investment can only be undertaken by a central government. Now, this central government, which must, and remember the citizen has a social contract with the state, not with the private sector, however wonderful it is. So now that same state.
That's a nice one.
Yeah, so that same state has to do certain things because the citizens are looking at it. The demonstrations will be against the state, they will not be against the private sector. So that in the here and now, even as it plans for long-term development planning, it also has to plan for short-term. So where does it go? In a global ecosystem where World Bank has a particular agenda. Hence the restrictions that Honorable Chris Barriomos has talked about, where you have to fulfill so many things, then they have to decide how you'll pay, then they will decide who you'll borrow from, then they will decide so many things. But on the ground, people want services, or they are going to go on the street.
That you must support homosexual before you give it.
Okay, so you have all that. And then the other thing you need to remember.
That's a new requirement.
And thank you. And the new thing we have, and it's good that the census has been launched, because as of now, tradeeconomics.com puts our dependency ratio at 86.83%. So that means most.
What does that mean?
It means for every 100 working people, for the people who are not working and are depending on them are 86.83%. So we have very many people, and they're talking about people who are below age 15 and above age 64.
So for every 10 Ugandans that are working, they're taking care of almost 9 people.
They're almost taking care of about 9 people. And sometimes they're not even just taking care of people, they're taking care of families. Everyone here is paying for certain families. You pay the children, you pay the sickness, you pay. So even the ones who are working cannot even benefit from how they are working. So then when you come to taxation, even if we are to pay taxes and all of us were to comply, it just can't be enough because the needs are very many. So when the government then looks at all of that and it has to do development, you have to make a choice. Do you pack today's needs as we look for 10, 50 years development planning? Or do you have to do today hoping that actually the economy will grow? The other time we're talking here about budgeting and the debt financing of the budget. So the issue is if the priorities, and maybe that's why we need to talk about what's not working, if the priorities that were set in the original budget can work, and we monitor and we are strict that it works, then we shall be sure that the people who are beneficiaries of the supplementary budget, like the students coming out of the universities, will then find jobs. Then we are widening the tax base, and then we shall also increase. And maybe, I think it is also a good thing that at this point in time, the African Union is beginning to deal with the question of unequal economic development and asking whether Africa should toe a different line. So you're beginning to see many presidents questioning whether this model actually works. And I imagine when they meet, whether at AU or at NAMO, whatever fora they are going to meet, some of these things will come out. And sometimes I get inspired by countries like Nigeria because they don't have a very high taxation rate. You see a lot of development. Most of their banks are local banks. They are not actually very big global banks. You don't find these big things there. Most of their banks are local banks, but by building that kind of economy, there's a lot of give back into the universities. I was there recently and I was amazed at how many people, local Nigerians, go back to the universities where they studied to put up buildings, 7 stories, 10 stories. All the person needs is put my name there. So they can do that. So we need to reflect beyond asking about supplementary and what is not working and what learnings. The learnings we take from all of these things is we need to develop our economy.
Okay.
And the best people to develop the economy is the state. Because we vote for the state, we don't vote for private sector. So our question should be to the state, how are you planning to develop for the 86% dependents? Because that's the population you have. So they are dependent, you have to develop for them. So that means sometimes borrowing may not be avoidable. But we have also discussed here that every country borrows. But they are lucky to have local banks, they borrow at lower rates. Thank you.
So when you say this, are you saying the state should be at the forefront of driving the economy?
Yes, because who said it shouldn't?
You're supposed to.
Okay.
That was just World Bank, which came up in the 80s, and there was an agenda for that. So it is not global wisdom, and it's not the only gold standard that the state should divest itself out of development. Okay? Let's give it a try.
Let me put one more question before I get to Dr. Sarah. Where is the place for the citizen, especially in this whole apportionment of supplementary budgets? You talked about elitists, we come here, we speak good English, but where is the place for
the
them
citizen
to be part of these supplementary budgets?
I thought they are going to be beneficiaries of the services of the supplementary. If you're talking about the road fund, if you're talking about enabling interns and SHOs, because who runs these hospitals wherever they are? Most of them are interns and senior house officers. So if they are equipped to remain there and earn their 1 million a month, then they're going to offer service, okay? If you're talking about poor students getting loan schemes, that is a benefit. When they get jobs, they will serve the country. So if we were to go point by point, the nursery seedlings, there's a lot of things in that supplementary budget. If it can be actualized and monitored and we ensure that it does the right thing, there's definitely going to be, the citizen is a beneficiary of that kind, either directly or indirectly.
Dr. Sarah, something Honorable Mara mentioned that really got me curious. 3.3 trillion. That the 2 trillion shillings we were talking about for Bank of Uganda was not approved.
Yes.
And when I look at it, and I remember a gentleman that used to be on this panel, who is now PSST, said the economy that works. With all these supplementaries, is there an economy that works?
No, the 2 trillion was approved, but there's another amount which they wanted on top of this.
No, he said...
No, Honorable Mara said the money meant for Bank of Uganda was not approved.
Yes.
And they asked the minister to come, because there were 2 supplementary
There was
budgets.
3.5 and 3.3.
Yeah. So they will debate
That's
it.
what I thought.
Yes, that's what, yeah, and that's what happened, because I was watching Parliament on that day they approved the supplementary. I wanted to first comment on, you know, imposed development vis-a-vis Africa-owned development, you know, the narrative by Professor Sarah. There is a time President Mbeki and President Obasanjo led the African continent in launching the new partnership for Africa's development, NEPAD. African leaders had embraced it as a blueprint for Africa's own development. But also we know that under the auspices of sovereignty, really an independent country is free to take advice or reject it from other people. And we have done it on several times, saying, even including the movement system of government, which never existed anywhere in the world, and we said, no, 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 no. We are coming from a chaotic history, which is clearly, you know, captured in the preamble of the Constitution, and we said this is our own political system, that how we want to be governed to achieve stability. So if we could push and create a political system as Uganda, what stops us from putting an economic system that we think is indigenous to us? Because there is this argument of ideas being imposed on you, on us whenever there is failure. What happened to NEPAD?
But now they are implementing the supplementary
No,
to meet
I'm
the needs today of today.
No, no, no. I think let me first develop my argument. If you look at NEPAD and why it failed, because that was a blueprint for Africa, embraced by Africa's leaders, led by President Mbeki and Obasanjo, both of them retired now. What were the core principles of NEPAD? Good governance, entrenchment of democracy and peace and security, sound economic policy, making and execution productive partnerships, and domestic ownership and leadership. What happened to NEPAD? Did World Bank take it away? Did anybody dictate it to us?
No.
So why do we want to find excuses for failure when we know the core problem of Africa is the leadership? I think that we need to stop running away from our problems and face the man in the mirror, the image in the mirror. It is ourselves, it's not anybody else. When it comes to the question of where does this leave the citizen? Well, I think today we're in a conversation where we said, but what is the exact inflation happening in this country? And I know I'm going to talk about amounts that even ordinary people cannot access. But get 1 million shillings today and go about shopping with children at home, basics. You will go home with nothing. But when I talk about that, I am also aware that Bank of Uganda released the data indicating that only 1% of Ugandans earn 1 million and above. So I'm talking about 1 million failing to do shopping for a basic average household for a week, well knowing that 1% of Ugandans earn 1 million and above. So where does this discussion leave the citizen? There is no need for guessing. People are struggling. People are doing very badly.
Doctor, coming back to our question, the economy that works, 3.3 trillion, which seems like it will come back to Parliament to be approved, especially looking at what BOU, we owe BOU in 4.8 trillion shillings. When you look at this, isn't it a concern of this recycling, and how do we end it?
Well, with all due respect to our friend Ramadan, technical expertise, technical leadership is not enough to turn the tables around. It is the politics. It is the political leadership. It is Honorable Baryomus and team that must invoke financial discipline in this country. It cannot be Ramadan.
Interesting. Let me come to Captain Francis Babu. Any lessons we can pick from these supplementaries that can really enhance and make us a better country, economically, government, the citizens, all of us getting involved?
When I came to the studio this evening, I told you that supplementary is a very simple thing. It's a technical thing. And you're going to get the answers, and you got the answers. I think the real point has been made by a professor. And actually, Nyerere said, Nyinyi, you people here are talking about the private sector, private sector. Where is the private sector? And he even quoted their bank. There is a bank they have there. This bank, you want to privatize it. Can this bank open a branch in New York or in London? So we have a problem of understanding the kind of model that we require for our countries. And I think the professor brought it at the right time. For us to sit here and start fighting over supplementary budgets, how do we get more resources to run the 48 million people we have in this country, to give them enough? As somebody said, we only have 1% earning 1 million. How do we improve that one? Then you sit around and say, wait, what kind of models do we need? Do we go with the model with the advice of IMF and the World Bank? Or do we sit down and think beyond the norm? We need to become entrepreneurial. We need to think about our country. You asked who are the people? The people are the government. These leaders are just representative of those people. How do we make our people understand that they own this country, and therefore certain things must be done in the right way? And I think this is where Nyerere became very clear. He said at independence they only had 8 graduates in Tanzania. 8. We didn't have that many either. We've had our problems for many years. So we need a model. And I think the professor has brought it out very clearly. What kind of thing can we do to get money right now? The other day I was listening, and I think Honorable Baryomus is here. People are saying we should go and borrow money to improve the tourist sector, tourism sector. Then I turned around and said, but the other day you told me there's a lot of gold somewhere in the east. We've got one of the biggest gold plants in Africa. Why don't we borrow money to turn that gold into bullions and we put it in our bank? Why must we bring some Chinese to go and excavate this gold? Then you tell me that we've got other resources in this country. We've got marble in Karamoja. We've got oil in Karamoja. We've got oil coming from this side. Why don't we borrow money to make sure that these things come out quickly so that we can improve our resources? And that's why I agreed with her. I think time has come for us to look a little bit more seriously into the economy of this country, how we can improve it. Then we would stop wondering, fighting over this. We will not even have supplementary budgets. We would have the money. So the whole point is, how do we get our country to exploit the small amount of resources that we have in this country so that we can improve our economy? And I think that's where our answer is. This business of blaming each other and a few things here and there are going to be there as long as we are in this kind of poverty. Yeah. We are very poor. In fact, I was reading about the countries that are poor in Africa, and we were one of them. How do we get out of this? Mm-hmm. And this is where I agreed with the professor, and I'd like to take this opportunity to say that this budgetary thing you're talking about is a technical thing. There are people who can do it. There are people who will do it with their eyes closed. They will even tell you where the money should come from, whether you borrow it or whatever you do with it. And that money will still be, it will continue on this rate if we don't look for the source of resources for our country. And this is where the problem is, nothing else.
If I may ask Captain Babu, you know, Captain Babu, you people have been here for 38 years. Are you saying you've never had such conversations?
We have.
And then what solution did you come up with?
There were people who were giving us better conversation than mine. For example, when I say they shouldn't tell the UCB, I was virtually thrown out of the room. So the whole point is that because the man of the World Bank and the IMF was much more, he had a bigger ear than I had. So the whole argument, this is a debate where people are on one side and on the other side, and our ideology at the same time must improve. We must really think about Uganda and stop thinking about other people. And I think this is where the problem is.
And lastly, let me come to Honorable Minister. How do we become more frugal with the finances we have? Because you can only cut your suit according to the cloth you have. And will this help us mitigate these numerous supplementary budgets?
Well, you have really insisted on presenting supplementary budgets as something very negative and so forth. Yes. We have tried to convince you that the supplementary budget is not necessarily beyond the normal, but you seem not to be getting it. Maybe now I speak in the Ruchiga, which you can speak much better.
He understands it very well.
Speak much better. But definitely you're right that we must be frugal and spend every coin that is available on meaningful interventions that translate into service delivery to improve the quality of life of Ugandans. And that's what we endeavor to do as government and all those in the positions of responsibility. And the situation is not hopeless as probably Sarah wants to put it, because our economy has remained buoyant. Even when we hit with COVID and the lockdown, I am sure we all appreciate that the economy did not collapse and didn't do as bad as in some other countries. We have remained afloat and above the level. Secondly, borrowing. At times we present borrowing as if it is very sinful, but all countries borrow. Actually, the indicator which we use is the debt to GDP ratio. If you check the ratings of many countries, a country like USA, their debt to GDP ratio, you can Google it, is over 200%. Countries like Singapore is about 160%. And the countries like DRC.
And some of the countries around us.
Countries like DRC is 13%. So also, having a very low debt to GDP ratio is not necessarily a sign of economic health and so forth. Country like Japan, over 100%. And for us today, as of June 30th this year, we were at the 46.2%. well below the threshold of 50%, which we have agreed upon as the East African community. But definitely the policy and where we are looking at is to boost production by supporting import substitution, value addition, and boosting production so that we can grow our economy. So that eventually we should not be looking at the World Bank, China, Exim, but our economy should be able to sustain and support itself. That's why when you look at some of the key interventions we are going into, we are in areas like parish development model, Myoga, where we are pushing money into the communities and we sensitize the population. We do mindset change for the local people now to be involved in the production. And we hope if we do this correctly, it should be able to boost our capacities.
There's one
deep
point
down
here. Where does America borrow from? Have you ever asked that question?
It's banks
They
and
borrow,
World Bank.
they borrow from themselves. And when they want to increase their ceiling of borrowing, they go to the Senate and ask permission. Once the Senate has increased the ceiling, they go and print.
Okay.
So that's another point you should get.
Absolutely. Because I'm raising this, because sometimes the arguments have been raised that when we pass a law in the parliament, as if we have committed what the Catholics call sacrilegious sort of sin. Whereas it's commonplace everywhere people borrow, but probably the bigger question is you borrow for what and what do you use the money for? And that calls for the question which you raised, frugality, parsimony, spending the money on interventions which are meaningful and which are meant for service delivery and to improve the quality of life of Ugandans. And all of us should be part of this. Everybody should open his or her eyes, including the citizens, to see that whatever money we borrow or pass in parliament is actually spent on what benefits all of us as a country, but not through wasteful expenditure, corruption, or all these abuses which sometimes we talk of.
Thank you, Honorable Minister.
And as a government, we are committed to zero tolerance to corruption, as we have already said, and to ensuring that all the money, whether borrowed or generated locally, is spent on the people of Uganda to address the welfare of the people of Uganda.
Thank you, Minister. I'll give Professor, then Dr. Sarah, Captain Francis Babu, and lastly, the Honorable Minister, your parting shots. I'll start with Professor.
Thank you very much, Timothy. I still think that one way to get out of whatever we have discussed here is to grow our economy.
Yes.
And the state has to be at the center of that economy. Look at the things which are succeeding under big time. They are state-owned enterprises. Kira Motors, through UDC. You look, I come from a university where there are a lot of innovations taking place. They will remain micro until the state takes them up. And when that happens, hopefully the economy will grow and then we can have more industries to take up more initiatives. But as long as we remain micro, as long as we don't invest in development, we shall actually remain poor. Other people will continue harvesting these ideas and they will develop for us. We shall stop at launching. You launch an innovation, the minister comes and says it was good. Tomorrow you don't see it anywhere. So we have a lot of wise people in this country. The one entity which can develop this and move this from one stage to a large scale of industrial development is the state. The other thing the state should be responsible for is the welfare of the people. That's why they're in Myoga, that's why they're in the SAGE, all those kinds of things. So those are two roles you cannot relinquish to the private sector, because the private sector is into short term and is into profits. So my parting shot is that the government should do more, if possible, invest more in Uganda Development Corporation, because it was part of the reason it was established to do that kind of uptake. Industrial parks, I know there's been a complaint about it. Let's fix what's not working in industrial parks. More tech hubs, so that we can move from the level of micro to something bigger. Then our economy will grow. Then we shall have a lot of revenue, and we shall not go for supplementary all the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sarah.
I think for me, my parting shot is on value for money. Wherever that money is invested, can the citizens realize value? somebody talked about the U.S. economy. Every quarter, the president of the U.S. gives accountability in terms of growth of the economy, with the jobs created, growth in taxation, all aspects of the economy. There is accountability to the people. I always like the aspect of jobs created per quarter of the economy. But can we trace jobs created in our economies? Just yesterday, I drove through Namamve Industrial Park. Most of those, are warehouses. People are just assembling products not made in Uganda. My first idea of the industrial park was that we are expanding the manufacturing sector, the industry sector, but we are assembling, we are, like renting or giving space for larger warehouses. I think that's not the concept. So once we do not have value in terms of direct expansion of the economy, in terms of jobs, in terms of revenue and taxation, and no accountability from the state, of course, on these accounts, then there will be no value for an ordinary citizen. Because even we know the service sector is struggling. Roads, hospitals. So we need to see value for a taxpayer in this country.
Thank you very much. Value is a very important aspect. Captain Francis Papo.
Thank you very much. I am extremely pleased by what is coming out of this now, is that we're looking at our country. And we've now got two areas. One area, the welfare of our citizen, the income of our government. You're looking at two areas. Now talk about budget. What money is coming in, and how much can we spend on our people? What services can we give to them? Now, we need good management. And we need, in entrepreneurship, there are two things. There's also something called intrapreneurship. In other words, areas where you have research, people who can research and come out, like what she's been talking about, the university. In most of the big corporations now in America, they have a department which does nothing but research and making sure that they can implement this. Now, we need to wake up as a country. We can't go on living in the 1960s. The civil service we had in 1960, that's out of date. And recently I had people saying they are going to put everything together and put them back in the ministry. We are going back to where we used to be. The regulators is the ingoing thing because they regulate the private sector. But not only do we have regulators, we need experts who can come out with new ideas that are going to move. In other words, let's run Uganda as a corporation that is going to make money to be able to run its own businesses. So until we get to that level of thinking beyond the norm, we're wasting our time. We're wasting our time on things that are totally out of date. And what did the president say? We are in industrial what? Fourth industrial revolution?
Yeah.
We are now talking about robots that talk for themselves. Robots are taking jobs of our people. Very soon, computers, I used to be a pilot. They have taken away all our jobs now. They fly those airplanes by themselves. We used to be 4 people in a cockpit. Now there are only 2. There used to be a flight engineer and a navigator. The navigator's job was taken over by an international system. So we have all sorts of things coming up with this digital era. We need to think a bit faster. By the way, our youth can do it. I've been seeing a lot of innovations by our youth. Do you know this thing they use for sending money?
Mobile money.
Mobile money? The one in Kenya was actually initially invented by Ugandan. These are young people who are coming up with. Now, when the professor said the government should support these ideas, I agree with her.
Okay.
I think time has come to support our people so that our country can change. And when you talk about private sector, you have to create a private sector. It will not come automatically. And foreigners will not come here and make a private sector for you. You have to build it. So we need to put money in the private sector. And what has been hurting me is that I see when government is financing, it finances foreigners. I want them to finance our people. Because if you finance a Ugandan, he will never go anywhere. But if you finance Mr. Smith or Mr. Brown or Mr. Patel, the chances are he's going to go away.
with the money.
Okay. Thank you very much. Finally, Honorable Minister.
Okay, thank you very much, and we appreciate the ideas coming up. Let me first clarify the issue of public service, which Sarah earlier on asked. I think the supplementary were providing 12 billion shillings to Uganda Consumers Lenders Association, UCLA, not money lenders, but Uganda Consumer Lenders Association. These are areas of salary loan reductions which happened in 2012, 2013, and 2013, 2014. I think the association had an MOU with the Ministry of Public Service, so public service is meeting that obligation, which is just arrears. It's not that the money was just borrowed and it's being paid, no. But coming to the conclusion that one, this government is accountable to Ugandans through different platforms. Parliament, we have a robust parliament. That's why a supplementary is brought there and it is debated in the public and Sarah is watching. We are here. This is part of accountability. Yes, this is part of accountability.
She had her glasses on that.
Absolutely. The budgets are not considered in secrecy. We are splitting each and every allocation here before the public. This is part of accountability. So you cannot accuse the government of Uganda as not being accountable. The president, the constitution provides for the president to give a state of the nation address every year, and he does so religiously, explaining what has been done. So there are many avenues. We have a decentralized system of governance where the councils are splitting these budgets. Part of the money we are passing through supplementaries to fund district or local governments. So I think, yes, we can continue to improve, but you cannot, as a blanket statement, say we are not accountable to Ugandans. We have several platforms where we account, and Ugandans can question the government at different levels for them to know whichever resources we have, how they are being utilized. Number two, the economy continues to grow, but we are pushing hard to make the economic growth to be double digit, but continues to grow even when we were hit with COVID, but we have continued growing. And whether you use academic and technical indicators of growth, or whether you use the naked eye examination, I am sure everybody appreciates that Uganda today is not the way it was 20, 30 years ago. Just move in the countryside, whichever direction you take, you will see transformation happening. And we continue to invest in those areas which will accelerate this transformation. For instance, that's why we've been putting a focus on science, technology, and innovations. Sarah says in Namanve, they are just assembling.
I said I saw some warehouses, big
Some,
warehouses.
Yes, you know, in science, you say the eye sees what it knows, or it sees what you want to see. Because they manufacture blankets, are they assembling blankets, for instance? Plastics and many other things, tires. I don't think you can say the tires are being assembled. There are many things
those
which...
big tanks.
Okay, but they are also warehouses.
Yes, they could be there. It's a big
Thank
yes.
you.
Can I give you some information here?
Yes, please.
Assembling business is good to train our people. In fact, the Chinese, the people of the 5 tigers, the first thing they did, they were used. They used to assemble. They have learned from assembling. They now have their own factories.
Absolutely.
So assembling is not
Yes,
bad.
some items assemble like phone. There is a assembling of phones and smart devices, like the buses by this Metu Katavaz is fabricating buses, but I think the majority of the products are being manufactured there in Namanve and even in Bali industrial area and so forth. And we have a focus on supporting this industrialization, and we mobilize and rally Ugandans to support all this. We have funds to support innovation, including even in the area of ICT. We provide resources to these young people.
I wanted to give you a story of a very, very big country, which was assembling. No, listen, they were assembling cars from Europe. They went 10 miles away, opened a branch, which produced the same cars with a different name.
Okay. Finally.
So yes, we must be frugal. We must make sure that we spend whatever coin we have to improve the welfare of Ugandans, and we are determined to do that. Our focus is to improve the quality of life of Ugandans by focusing on increasing exports rather than the imports, by adding value to the resources which we have. That's why you have heard the president say we shall not allow exportation of raw minerals and raw materials, but rather we attract investors to come and add value to whatever we have, so that you create jobs, you get more taxes, and raise more money, and many other interventions. So I am very optimistic. The future is very bright, and we are moving toward that direction. The criticisms from SAR and the likes notwithstanding. So I think we are making a forward march, and Uganda is on the right move.
Thank you. Let me read some feedback that has come through at least. Mzamiru from Katebwa says, happy to see Senior Francis Babu and Honorable Badiomunsi. Budgeting is simply, it gives us direction on where to go and gives us intent to spend. Not that we can alter everything. The issues keep coming up. We ought to deal with what is even there, that is not even in the budget. What only is wrong is indeed truly that MPs are trying to receive 100 million. This is not factual.
I am moving for it. Whoever has it should give me my share.
Peter Sande says, thank you, Timothy. To the minister has justified the physical adjustments. Indeed, unforeseen circumstances like floods, road maintenance, NAM conferences all need adequate funding, okay? Finally, Justus from Mbale says, only a person who understands the law can cheat them. I think the Constitution needs more provisions for the supplementary funding. And to say thank you to Professor Sarah. Thank you very much, Dr. Sarah. Thank you very much, Captain Francis Babu. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for coming through. And for the team that is on the floor, thank you very much for ensuring that we have a very good show. We'll end with this quote from Benjamin Franklin. It says, beware of those little expenses. A small leak can sink a great ship.
Yes.
Good night.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
Meet Brian Namanya, a visionary and a game changer whose team at Tuwayo is breathing new life into domestic tourism. By curating exciting yet affordable experiences for Ugandans and foreigners to enjoy, with the help of technology, Brian is showing us all the immense potential out there. Those who know Brian know him as a serial entrepreneur who's always been challenging the status quo and won't stop now. Brian, we're in your corner. You are unstoppable. MTN, the Unstoppable Network, celebrates you. Visit www.tuwayo.com and together, let's support Ugandans